A poor 6-year-old black girl once approached a paralyzed millionaire, her voice earnest. "If you'd trade your leftovers for a miracle," she asked, "would you do it? I can make you walk again." He laughed, a hollow, disbelieving sound. But then everything changed. Tonight, however, there was only the chill. Robert Harrison, a wealthy 52-year-old white millionaire, sat in the profound silence of his opulent yet frigid mansion. Outside the vast window, December's heavy snow drifted, swirling gently in the pale yellow glow, blanketing the sprawling estate in a pristine, silvery white, a fortress isolated from the world. The magnificent living room, once designed for vibrant laughter and lively conversation, now stood eerily quiet, an echoing monument to a life unlived. Robert remained motionless in his expensive wheelchair, that soulless contraption that had usurped his legs for 20 long years. His gaze, vacant and unfocused, pierced through the glass, his mind lost in the distant echoes of a life once brimming with joy and boundless hope. He remembered that fateful day 2 decades ago when a car accident had stolen his ability to walk forever. Before then, Robert had been a formidable, ambitious man, revered by friends and business partners alike. He possessed everything: immense wealth, soaring fame, and his beautiful wife, Diana Harrison, perpetually by his side. But the accident had irrevocably altered his world. In the days following the devastating news that his legs would never recover, friends and partners still called and visited with initial concern. Yet their solicitude quickly waned, replaced by disinterest once they recognized Robert had lost his power and influence. Phone calls dwindled, then ceased. Social engagements became rare, then vanished entirely, leaving him adrift in the deepest loneliness. He gradually, painfully understood the stark truth of the vain world he inhabited. People cared only for their own interests, and no one truly shared another's pain. Worse still, the woman he had loved beyond measure eventually departed. Diana, who had once graced countless lavish parties by his side, initiated divorce proceedings after 5 years of enduring the bitterness and resentment he had poured onto her daily. She confessed she could no longer bear the hatred and coldness that glinted in his eyes each time she reached out to help him. When Diana walked away, Robert felt as though his final tether to the world had snapped. His eyes no longer shed tears. Only boundless emptiness and an unyielding chill remained. Then even his mother, Eleanor Harrison, the solitary soul who had consistently tried to remain connected, grew distant. Each of her visits was marked by a deepening sorrow and helplessness etched into her aged eyes. As she witnessed her only son retreat further into the encroaching darkness, she pleaded with him to reconnect, to discover new joys. But Robert's unyielding pride had forged an invisible wall between him and the woman who had nurtured him for so many years. Her visits became sparse, until now they were little more than brief, awkward phone calls punctuated by painful silences. Robert sighed quietly, his gaze sweeping across the dim, cavernous room. The priceless paintings adorning the walls and the lavish furnishings, once symbols of his success, now stirred nothing within him but bitterness and an echoing emptiness. He had once believed money could buy anything, but now he understood that no fortune could purchase an understanding heart, a comforting hand, or genuine love. He recalled the visceral feeling of walking on his own 2 feet, a sensation he had dreamed of experiencing again for 20 years. He despised himself for his helplessness, despised the meaningless existence he led, and more than once had thought of ending it all. Yet he'd never found the courage to truly let go. So he remained, a silent ghost wandering a world too wide for him. A cold draft slipped through a crack in the door, making him shiver despite the room's warmth. Robert wondered if his life could ever change. Did miracles truly exist? Or were they just the naive lies he once believed in his youth? In the terrifying silence, he suddenly heard a soft knock at the servant's side door. He startled, glancing at the clock on the wall. It was well past midnight. Who could possibly come at this hour? His only remaining maid, Sophia, had long since left his service. At first he wanted to ignore the persistent sound. Nothing, he thought, could pull him from the self-imposed solitude he'd embraced. But the tapping continued, gentle yet insistent, as if attempting to awaken something deep within his very soul. With a sigh, curiosity ultimately won out. He slowly propelled his wheelchair down the long, dark corridor, past cold rooms filled with countless sad memories. When he finally reached the door, his heart began to pound, a mix of anticipation and anxiety churning within him. He opened it slowly. Standing before him was a tiny girl, her dark skin striking against the weak porch light. Her clothes were ragged, and her big, bright eyes looked up at him, full of an undeniable hope. "Mister!" her small voice rang out in the freezing night. "I'm so hungry. Do you have any leftovers you could spare?" Robert froze, completely captivated by the raw sincerity in those eyes, utterly unaware that his lonely, frozen world was about to change forever, beginning with this tiny moment. He remained caught, completely immersed in the sincerity shining from her gaze. The pale yellow porch light softly illuminated her delicate face, accentuating the smooth ebony of her skin against the bone-cutting cold of the winter night. She stood there shivering, her wide, clear brown eyes fixed on him without a hint of fear or hesitation. Robert cleared his throat softly, attempting to mask his surprise and sudden embarrassment. He was accustomed to the wary glances and evasive looks people gave when they saw his extravagant wheelchair, but the girl before him seemed oblivious to his disabled legs, unafraid to stand before a wealthy white man. "Did you say something?" Robert asked, his voice gentler than he'd intended. The girl gently brushed her tangled, snow-dusted curls aside and looked up at him, her voice trembling but clear. "I'm so hungry. Do you have any leftovers?" Robert felt a sharp pang in his heart at those genuine words. How long had it been since someone spoke to him with such simplicity and honesty? How long since anyone saw him as a person rather than his money or his crippled legs? He studied her more closely. She wore a threadbare coat with one pocket torn, revealing the thin fabric beneath. Her tattered sneakers allowed her tiny toes to peek out, her skin ashen from the freezing air. An image that stirred an inexplicable ache in him. Instinctively, he wondered how a little girl like this could be wandering alone in the snowy night, coming to a stranger's home to beg for food. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone softening with a concern he didn't quite understand. "Jasmine Thompson," she replied without hesitation, her small voice carrying a surprising confidence that belied her worn appearance. Robert nodded slowly. "Do you live nearby?" "Yes, sir. My mom and I live in a small apartment across the street. She often works very late," Jasmine said, pointing toward the dilapidated row of flats opposite his mansion. Robert turned to look where she pointed. He realized He'd been so isolated that he'd never even noticed the impoverished apartments just steps from his estate. A flush of shame rose in him. How selfishly he'd lived. "Then why didn't you wait for your mother to come home and eat together?" he asked gently. "My mom works 3 different jobs. Some nights she gets home very late. Today our kind neighbor said rich people always throw away good food, so I thought I'd ask you." Jasmine explained matter-of-factly, as though her actions were perfectly ordinary. Robert's chest ached at her blunt honesty. He fell silent for a moment, watching the little girl shiver. Then, without hesitation, he opened the door wider. "Come inside. I'll get you something to eat." Jasmine stepped into the house, tentatively, her eyes widening at the opulence around her. Expensive treasures stretched out before her like a whole new world. Yet Robert was most surprised by her lack of greed or envy. Only a childlike curiosity glowed in her gaze. He led Jasmine into the kitchen and retrieved a platter of uneaten food. She accepted it with deep gratitude, but instead of digging in, Jasmine looked up at him earnestly. "Do you want me to help you?" she asked. Robert chuckled softly. "What could a little girl like you possibly do?" "I can help you walk again," Jasmine said with utter seriousness, fully believing her own words. Robert's smile vanished, his eyes flashing annoyance. Surely she was mocking him. He was about to refuse outright, but the clear sincerity in her innocent gaze stayed his tongue. There was no trace of ridicule. She truly believed she could help him. "Are you joking?" he asked, fighting to remain calm. "No, I'm not joking," Jasmine answered firmly. "My mother always says that kindness and love can heal anything. If you help me not be hungry, I'll surely be able to help you." Robert looked into her eyes again and saw nothing but purity and sincerity. He remembered the countless doctors, renowned specialists, and costly treatments he'd pursued over 20 years, all to no avail. How could this little girl do what the entire medical world had failed to do? Yet something in Jasmine's unwavering faith stirred a spark of hope in him, something he hadn't felt in years. "All right," he whispered. "I'll agree, but only because you're hungry and cold. Not because I believe in the miracles you speak of." Jasmine beamed, her smile the first warmth that had touched Robert's icy heart in years. Outside, the snow continued to fall heavily. But for the first time in 20 years, Robert felt something shift within him. And it all began with a strange little black girl on his doorstep on a freezing winter night. As the door closed behind Jasmine, Robert remained motionless in the vast living room, cradling the small flower she had just given him. He gently traced its fragile, slightly yellowed petals. And yet there was a strange beauty in them, the beauty of a genuine gratitude he had long since forgotten. Robert sighed. For the first time in years, he felt a rare lightness in his chest. The next morning, when Sophia, his longtime housekeeper, arrived for work, Robert decided to tell her about the strange encounter the night before. He'd always trusted Sophia. She'd worked for his family since he was a child and had cared for him through his hardest days. So he was taken aback by her reaction. "You can't trust a random child like that. Especially a little black girl from that rundown neighborhood," Sophia said sternly. "Who knows what she and her mother want? Maybe they know you're rich and want to exploit your kindness?" Robert frowned, offended by Sophia's harsh words. He knew she held old-fashioned prejudices, but he'd never felt so irritated. Deep inside, a protective urge for Jasmine stirred. "Sophia, She's only 6 years old. I found her completely sincere, Robert replied softly. Sincere? Sophia scoffed, her eyes narrowed with distrust. Robert, how many people have taken advantage of your wealth? Don't let yourself make that mistake again. Robert fell silent. Her words stung, but they also made him question. Had he been too naive and trusting? That afternoon, a familiar knock sounded at the door again. Robert opened it swiftly to find Jasmine standing there, her little face radiant like a winter sunrise. "Hello, Mr. Robert," she called cheerfully, offering him another small flower wrapped carefully in old newspaper. "I came back to say thank you. This is the miracle of gratitude." Robert smiled, and all his worries seemed to disappear when he saw the clear light in her eyes. He accepted the flower with genuine warmth. "Thank you, Jasmine," he said gently. "This truly is a beautiful gift." Jasmine beamed, then suddenly asked, her tone serious, "Mr. Robert, your legs must hurt a lot, right? How long has it been since you could walk?" Robert was momentarily taken aback by her straightforward question, but her sincerity disarmed him. He couldn't refuse. "Yes, Jasmine. I was injured many years ago. The doctors say I'll never walk again." "But the doctors don't know everything, do they?" Jasmine said softly as she stepped closer. "May I touch your knee once?" Robert hesitated, then nodded. Jasmine moved forward and placed her tiny hand on his knee. In that instant, he felt a strange warmth ripple through him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in 20 years. It wasn't a clear sensation in his legs, but rather a peaceful warmth spreading through his heart, as if her small hand had reached the deepest part of his soul. He looked down at her, eyes wide with curiosity. "Why are you doing this, Jasmine?" "I'm sending love and faith to your legs," she replied earnestly, her eyes shining. "My mother always says that if you truly believe and love, miracles can happen." Robert studied her closely. In that moment, he realized Jasmine was not just a needy child, but a beautiful soul capable of touching the darkest corners of his heart. He saw her now, not with pity or curiosity, but with respect and profound gratitude. Standing tall, Jasmine looked up at him with unwavering conviction. "Mr. Robert, the miracle has already begun. All you need to do is believe." After she left, Robert sat alone, gazing at the little flower Jasmine had given him. He wondered if he'd been wrong to cling to his prejudices. Perhaps Sophia's harsh words weren't absolute truth, but the product of age and old biases. In his heart, those prejudices began to crack, and for the first time in 20 years, he resolved not to let them obscure the truth any longer. He was ready just a little bit to let hope and humanity's light into his dark world. When Jasmine left, the little flower still resting in Robert's hand, emotions he'd never felt before stirred in his soul. A cold gust of wind swept against the window pane, carrying with it a vague sense of unease. Inside, Robert's long-held prejudices began to crack, but the world outside remained full of prying eyes, suspicion, and the hidden dangers that a black girl like Jasmine, or anyone from a vulnerable community, faced every day. That evening, in a pitch-dark apartment across the street, Margaret Thompson, Jasmine's mother, returned home after a long shift. Though she was just over 30, her face was etched with fatigue, and her eyes carried a constant weariness. Life as a single mother raising her child in a poor neighborhood, surrounded by subtle bias and discrimination, had forged in Margaret a tough resilience, but also an undercurrent of perpetual anxiety. "Mama, I did exactly what Mrs. Patterson told me," Jasmine exclaimed, holding out the container of leftovers she'd gotten from Robert's house. Margaret looked at it in surprise. Her daughter's joyous eyes softened her heart, but panic quickly followed. "Where did you get this?" "I told you not to wander around after dark, Jasmine, especially to strangers' houses. Don't you realize how dangerous that is?" Margaret hugged her tightly, her voice trembling with fear. "But he was so nice, Mama. Mr. Robert gave me food, and he actually listened to me. He's nothing like other white people," Jasmine said simply, unaware of the worry swelling in her mother's chest. Margaret froze. Robert. She tried to stay calm, but horrific stories of racial exploitation, wealthy men preying on children of color, rushed to her mind like a fierce wave. She thought of so many black women who'd been falsely accused, forced to protect their own children from scornful stares, cruel taunts, or even real threats from those pretending to be kind. "Tell me about him, Jasmine," Margaret said, sitting down and scrutinizing every small reaction of her daughter. Jasmine eagerly described the silver-haired man in the wheelchair at the grand mansion who had given her food and listened to her small dreams. But when she casually mentioned the miracle of helping him walk again, Margaret's panic only grew. "Are you sure he didn't do anything to scare you? Did he touch you or ask weird questions?" Margaret pressed, her voice hardening with both worry and anger at the thought of her child being taken advantage of. "No, he only let me touch his leg. His legs haven't worked in so long, Mama. I just wanted to help him feel less lonely," Jasmine replied softly, sensing her mother's distress. Margaret pulled her even closer, her heart a swirl of conflicting emotions. Love for her daughter, sorrow for the dangers black children face, and an overwhelming fear of a world she couldn't control. Finally, she stood silently, determined to confront Robert and protect her girl at all costs. The next morning, just as Robert was finishing breakfast, a rapid knock came at the door. When he opened it, he found a slender black woman with fierce eyes, Margaret Thompson, standing on his doorstep. "You must be Robert Harrison," Margaret said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'm Jasmine's mother. I want to know what you did with my daughter last night." Robert was taken aback, but quickly recognized the worry in Margaret's gaze. He gently invited her inside and explained everything that had happened, from Jasmine's request for food to their conversation. Yet the atmosphere between them grew tense as Margaret's long-standing defenses kicked in. "Do you know what people say about wealthy white men and poor black girls? Do you know how scared I was to see my daughter walking into your home alone in the middle of the night?" Margaret said, her tone firm, but shaking with the pain of a single mother who'd endured too much. "You won't be the first man to promise good things and turn them into a nightmare for a child of color, Mr. Harrison." Robert hesitated, then replied slowly, "I understand your fear, Margaret, but Jasmine is the first child to make me feel human again. I never had ill intentions toward her. I only wanted to help." Margaret looked him squarely in the eyes and saw not pity or dark desire, but loneliness and a yearning to be trusted. Yet she still wasn't ready to lower her guard. "If you truly have nothing to hide, I want to see where you live for myself. I'll come here with Jasmine, and only when I feel safe will my daughter come back. Do you agree?" she asked. Robert nodded without hesitation. You and Jasmine are always welcome here. If I ever give you cause for doubt, tell me. I don't want anyone to feel afraid in this house again." Margaret studied Robert for a long moment, then gave a small nod. In that instant, both realized that despite the barriers of past fear and societal prejudice, the courage to speak openly could forge a new path forward, however fraught with doubt and pain. And so the true journey of change, for those once stifled by racial bias and those long isolated by privilege, had taken its first tentative steps. The tense atmosphere of that morning still lingered as Margaret left the mansion with Jasmine, her heart full of doubts and confusion. Yet, true to her word, the next evening Margaret returned with her daughter. She couldn't deny the mixture of curiosity and unease she felt stepping through the tall iron gate into a world so different, where the cold white brick walls seemed to symbolize the distance and prejudice that had divided generations. Jasmine clutched her mother's hand, her eyes bright with excitement, yet wary. Margaret felt her pulse quicken as they approached the front door. Robert's house was brilliantly lit, and his silhouette stood patiently in the window as if he'd been waiting for them a long time. Just as they crossed the front lawn, a luxury car pulled up beside the gate. The window rolled down to reveal Dolores Mayfield, their wealthy neighbor, known for her vicious remarks about those poor people of color. Dolores raised an eyebrow at Margaret and Jasmine, then sneered loudly through the patio. "Atekatens wedeo, feswandis wataden de gemeo we, nasmayon that saw me. Not bothering to hide her contempt. Wow, Harrison's being kind to a bunch of beggars now. What a topsy-turvy world," her words carried across the street, catching the ears of other neighbors out for an evening stroll. A middle-aged man in a fur coat slowed his pace to give them a scornful look. A woman nearby shook her head, whispering vicious comments about the Thompsons daring to set foot in the rich folks' domain. Margaret heard it all, each cruel remark, like a dagger to her pride. Jasmine squeezed her hand tighter, her eyes flicking anxiously to her mother. But Margaret lifted her chin and quietly led her daughter forward into the mansion's doorway, her heart pounding with turmoil. She knew that a single moment of hesitation could make her child a target of the silent hatred and hidden violence that prowled this place, where people of color were only allowed to do menial work, never to be treated as honored guests. The door swung open to reveal Robert, his face bright with a rare warmth. He gently invited them into the living room, ignoring the hostile stares outside as a silent act of protection. Today he had prepared the room meticulously, the chairs arranged neatly, a pot of steaming tea on the table, and a small pastry placed just so, an unassuming but heartfelt welcome. "Thank you for trusting me." Again, Margaret. "Hello, Jasmine." "I'm so glad you're here," Robert began, striving to ease the tension. Margaret sank into a chair, her eyes still alert but noticeably softened. Jasmine, however, could barely contain her excitement. She darted around the room, taking everything in, then ran back to her mother and whispered, "Mama, Mr. Robert is so lonely. I think he needs us and we need him too. Here, nobody calls me a nuisance." Margaret's heart ached. Despite the alien and judgmental glances, Jasmine had found a rare peace beside this man. As Jasmine busied herself with the pastry, Robert turned to Margaret, his eyes shining with sincerity and a touch of nervousness. "I know this may seem sudden, but I truly need someone by my side. This house is too large, too cold, and I can't manage everything on my own. I've talked to my lawyer about hiring a housekeeper, but no one stays long. Jasmine has given me something I thought I'd lost: faith and a sense of purpose. Margaret fell silent. In Robert's gaze, she saw genuine loneliness, not pity or ulterior motives. Yet bitter memories of the past made her hesitate. "Do you really think this is that simple? Aren't you afraid of the rumors out there? Afraid people will say you're harboring my daughter for some impure reason?" she challenged. Robert nodded slowly. "I used to live for society's approval, and it left me crippled in both body and spirit. I don't want to live that way anymore. If you'll have us, I'd like to invite you both to stay here, at least until your lives settle. I ask for nothing in return but your trust, your friendship, and if you'll allow it, a sense of family." Margaret was silent for a long time. She knew this opportunity, a safe home, steady meals, a brighter future for Jasmine, was something she'd barely dared to dream of. Yet her pride as a poor black woman hardened by years of humiliation and scorn rose up in conflict. She recalled countless moves forced by landlords who threw her out because of her skin color, the fear of walking alone late at night with no one to protect her, the tears she'd seen in Jasmine's eyes when classmates excluded her. All of it swelled in her heart. Now finally, Margaret squeezed Jasmine's hand and looked Robert in the eye. "If you truly want to share your home, I have 3 conditions. First, Jasmine's needs come first. Second, I will help manage the household. We will not be freeloaders. Third, if someday you want us to leave, just tell me and we will go with our dignity intact." Robert smiled, feeling a genuine warmth in his chest for the first time in years. "I promise." Outside, the hostile stares and gossip continued, but inside that door, for the first time in a long while, 3 strangers chose to trust one another, staking their lives on a bold decision that would change their fates forever. No sooner had the mansion doors closed behind them than the whispers and unhidden stares of neighbors and Robert's old acquaintances continued to echo. Outside, news that a black family had moved into the millionaire's house spread through the upscale neighborhood like ink in clear water. And within days, the undercurrents of prejudice had flooded the home, where 3 people were only beginning to build their first measure of peace. Robert, Margaret, and Jasmine's shared life began in a swirl of strangeness. Margaret awoke before dawn to tend the kitchen and manage the household. Jasmine bounded through the grand rooms, filling the emptiness with the joyful laughter of childhood. But that happy atmosphere was soon strangled by countless skeptical glances and poisonous words from beyond the walls. Anonymous letters started appearing at the gate, full of venomous warnings. "They'll bleed you dry," and "those black folks are here to exploit you." Poor Harrison, fooled so easily. Dolores Mayfield and her wealthy friends openly gossiped about Robert's downfall at the golf club, delighting in the fall of a man once a symbol of high society, now a laughingstock. People who once bowed to Robert now avoided him on the street, muttering derisively behind his back. Some old acquaintances even sent pointed emails about the dangers of trusting people of color. All of it left Robert discouraged, while Margaret grew tense and angry, especially every time she saw her daughter peeking nervously through the curtains, guessing whether a police officer might call to question why a stranger was living in Robert's home. Tensions peaked one Saturday morning when Eleanor Harrison, Robert's mother, appeared at the mansion gate. Draped in an elegant coat and walking with determined steps, she swept a stern gaze across the familiar house, now transformed by the presence of 2 black women. Robert was guiding Jasmine through a drawing lesson in the living room when the doorbell rang. He watched his mother's face on the security monitor, her expression unreadable but tense. When he opened the door, Eleanor offered no greeting, only a cold look directed at Margaret, who was preparing breakfast in the kitchen. "Mother, this is Margaret and Jasmine. They're guests and now family to me," Robert said, introducing them. Eleanor didn't even glance at Margaret. She turned her gaze to her son. "Robert, aren't you ashamed? You've let these two strangers, different class, different color, live in this house. What were you thinking, letting them take over the kitchen your mother once tended with her own hands?" The room seemed to freeze. Margaret felt her blood rise to her cheeks, but forced herself to stay calm. Jasmine cowered behind her mother, and Robert bowed his head, his hands clenched in anxiety. "You don't understand," Robert began. But Eleanor cut him off sharply. "You've grown weak, son. They'll leave you with nothing. Margaret, what right do you have to live behind these walls? Do you think you deserve it?" Margaret raised her head, her eyes cold but steady. "I come as a mother, a woman who works tirelessly for her child and a person of dignity. I haven't taken a penny from Robert. I work. I'm not here begging for white people's pity. If you doubt my worth, look at how I care for this home, and look at my daughter's eyes now, no longer afraid each night." Eleanor was taken aback by Margaret's firmness. Part of her wanted to retort, yet no valid argument came to mind. "Mrs. Harrison," Margaret continued, her voice trembling yet resolute, "I know what you think of people like me. You don't need to hide it. But I beg you, if you truly love your son, look at his happiness. The happiness that my daughter and I are striving to bring, not take away." The air turned stiflingly heavy. Jasmine gripped her mother's skirt, watching every word and movement. Robert looked from his mother to Margaret, his heart torn, between gratitude, wounded pride, and fear of being abandoned. For the first time, Robert refused to stay silent. He gripped the arms of his wheelchair, lifted his chin, and looked his mother in the eye. "Mother, thank you for coming. But my life here has felt dead for years. Only when Margaret and Jasmine arrived did I remember how to feel joy, hope, and love like an ordinary person. I don't need your approval, but I won't let anyone, even you, humiliate or drive them away. This is my home, and I want them to stay." Eleanor fell silent. Her face wavered between wounded pride, sorrow, and bewilderment at her son's newfound strength. She turned away. Tears glistening in eyes she tried to hide. In the small kitchen, Margaret exhaled deeply. Jasmine wrapped her arms around her mother, and Robert turned to his family, his eyes filled with both gratitude and regret for the hardships they'd endured. But from that moment on, the walls dividing these three strangers began to crack wide open. And though the prejudice outside remained unrelenting, behind those doors a new family was taking shape, stronger and more resilient than any insult could ever destroy. The tension in Robert's house after that fierce confrontation with Eleanor had eased somewhat, though the atmosphere was no longer as pristine as it had been at the very beginning, nor was it as stifling as before. Even though prejudice still ran rampant outside, a small seed of peace had begun to sprout behind those doors. Margaret moved quietly about her chores. Jasmine chatted happily with Robert, and Robert, for the first time in years, began to look forward to those fleeting moments spent with the two of them. With her boundless energy and innocent faith, Jasmine had breathed new life into Robert's world, Every morning she would knock on his door, bubbling over with strange dreams she'd had, or tug him into the garden to try lifting your leg a little just for fun. At first, Robert would laugh it off, assuming it was a child's game from someone who could never understand an adult's despair. But strangely, each time Jasmine gently touched his knee, each time she patiently massaged his calf, he felt something different. A faint tingling at first, then a subtle warmth, and even a brief pinch of pain, just like the years when his legs still served him. One night lying in bed, he felt his foot twitch ever so slightly, the first sensation in nearly 20 years. He thought he must be dreaming. The next morning, Jasmine watched him quietly, then grinned mysteriously. "I told you the miracle is real, if you dare to believe." Margaret stood behind them, moved yet fearful. Happiness had never come easily for her. She managed the household in silence, endured the harassing phone calls, and bore the whispered slanders with patience. Yet when she saw Robert beginning to lift his leg under his daughter's encouragement, she understood that hope, even the most fragile kind, could still save a person. After a week, Robert decided to undergo another neurological exam, partly to reassure Margaret, partly because he feared he might be experiencing nothing more than a happy hallucination. Dr. Emily Richards, a renowned neurologist who had followed his case for years, greeted him with a look that was half sympathy, half weariness. "Mr. Harrison, I'm surprised to see you so soon. What's on your mind?" Dr. Richards asked, dusting off his decades-old files. Robert hesitated, then described the strange sensations, the vivid dreams, the moments his legs seemed to wake up. Dr. Richards proceeded with careful reflex tests and an MRI scan. During the exam, her eyes flicked several times toward Margaret and Jasmine, waiting in the hallway, an expression of suspicion and thinly veiled mistrust on her face. An hour later, Emily delivered her verdict. "Your spinal nerves do show signs of measurable recovery. I've never seen anything like this in my career. However, I can't rule out a psychological component. These improvements might stem from suggestion, or, I'm sorry to ask, but has anyone been altering your medication or treatment protocol?" Robert blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" Dr. Richards fixed her gaze on Margaret, then on Jasmine. "I have to ask. Some families or caretakers have been known to manufacture false signs of improvement for personal gain or to control assets. I know this sounds extreme, but with wealthy patients, such things can happen. Are you fully in control of your medication and finances, Mr. Harrison?" The room grew heavy with tension. Margaret's cheeks flushed with a mix of shame and anger. Jasmine looked up at the doctor, innocent and unaware of the implication behind her words. Robert took a slow breath and replied, his voice cold. "I oversee everything. Margaret never touches my meds, and Jasmine is just a child." Though still doubtful, Dr. Richards could not refute the test results. "Regardless, this is highly unusual. I'll continue to monitor you. And if you don't mind, I'd like to bring in independent experts for a second opinion." Robert agreed, but a surge of indignation and humiliation welled up inside him. He thought of all that Margaret and Jasmine had already endured, and now he, too, was being pulled into society's poisonous circle of suspicion whenever someone crossed class lines. What no one knew was that this very examination would spark a brewing storm. A nurse, casually remarking on Robert's miraculous recovery, confided in an acquaintance, none other than Diana Harrison's secretary. Diana, once the epitome of high society, now struggling financially after the divorce, saw her chance. In her mind, Robert's kindness had been naive, and Margaret and Jasmine's presence in the mansion a sinister ploy to seize his estate. Wasting no time, Diana hired a lawyer, gathering evidence to launch a legal offensive under the guise of protecting her vulnerable, disabled ex-husband from predatory opportunists of color. Outside, the winds of prejudice and personal interest were gathering strength, but in those final days of winter at the Harrison estate, Jasmine still came each morning to Robert's side, gently placing her small hand on his knee and whispering, "Today, let's try lifting your leg again. Miracles require a bit of courage." And amid all the doubts, Robert dared to hope, not only for the return of his own legs, but for the future of this extraordinary family. News of the Harrison miracle dominated the tabloids overnight. Secret snapshots of Robert with Margaret and Jasmine taken from the garden were splashed across the front pages under cruel headlines. Paralyzed millionaire hypnotized by mysterious black girl, and ex-wife warns, don't let yourself be ruined by those street kids. The papers gleefully dug into Margaret's poverty and skin color, twisting the facts to satisfy the public's malicious curiosity. Within days, a thick lawsuit arrived at the mansion. Diana Harrison, claiming to protect her ex-husband's assets and mental health, petitioned the court to freeze Robert's property and accused Margaret and Jasmine of brainwashing, emotional manipulation, and misrepresenting his medical condition. Diana's lawyer publicly declared, "We will expose every conspiracy aimed at profiting from a patient, especially when it involves exploiting trust across class and racial lines." Those cold words and vicious insinuations were like knives twisting into Margaret's already fragile dignity. Night after night, her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Harassing calls, threats from anonymous strangers, even garbage packages and hate mail dropped at their gate. Terrified, Jasmine asked her mother, "Is it because I'm black that people hate me?" Margaret could only hold her daughter in silent tears of helpless shame. Robert, pained and furious, struggled to stay calm. He spent hours beside Jasmine, encouraging her to draw, read books, and tell stories to soothe her fears. At night, he and Margaret would sit together by the dark window for hours, sharing their years of loneliness, their fear of being cast aside, and above all, their resolve not to let the past or anyone's prejudice dictate their happiness. The more the public turned against them, the more Margaret wanted to shield her daughter from the storm. One evening, after Robert had escorted Eleanor to her car, Margaret gently said, "Maybe Jasmine and I should leave." "Robert," she continued, "you've already endured so much pressure because of us. All the things people are saying, I'm afraid they're true. I'm scared Jasmine will hate her own skin color when she grows up." Robert took Margaret's hand, his voice calm but firm. "Don't you see, Margaret? They only hate what they don't understand. If we leave, they win. They'll prove that public pressure, difference, and skin color are enough to tear apart a family. I've lived 20 years, trapped by my own fears. I won't let Jasmine inherit fear from the world outside." Margaret shook her head, tears silently falling. She'd never believed a white man would dare to defend her against the whole world. But now, faced with Robert's unwavering sincerity, she felt something transcend race: understanding, responsibility, and love. Just when it seemed they were at their weakest, Eleanor Harrison, the very woman who had fiercely opposed Margaret and Jasmine, began to change. Quietly, she observed Margaret running the household, caring for her son's meals and rest, patiently sitting with Jasmine as she studied, played, and learned right from wrong. She never caught a hint of the deceit or cunning that Diana had accused them of. Instead, Eleanor realized the truth. For years, she had viewed the world through a lens of privilege, judging the less fortunate by the color of their skin, not by who they really were. One late evening, Eleanor called Margaret into the backyard where she was tending the plants. "Margaret," she began, her tone still reserved, but gentler now. "I'm sorry for misjudging you. I believed Diana's lies, that you were exploiting Robert for his fortune. But I've seen enough to understand that without you and Jasmine, my son would still be just a shadow of himself, trapped in loneliness and anger for 2 decades. Margaret said nothing, but her eyes shone with gratitude. Eleanor continued, "I'm going to speak with the family lawyer. I'll do everything I can to protect Robert and to protect you and Jasmine. What Diana is doing is unacceptable. The world needs to hear the truth from those who live it." From that night on, a quiet alliance formed in the mansion. 3 adults of different ages, backgrounds, and skin colors, and 1 small girl. They were no longer merely battling society's prejudice. They had become a true family, believing that the only real miracle wasn't a healed pair of legs, but compassion and unity. Outside, Diana and the press continued their smear campaign, but inside those doors, for the first time in years, the true meaning of family began to shine through, a bond stronger than any accusation, any prejudice, any difference. And in that still glow of hope, Margaret knew she had been right, not to let go. Ever since Eleanor began to take her side, Margaret felt she'd gained a real ally in the mansion. What she didn't know was that even within these familiar walls, a silent darkness lurked, embodied in the one person Robert had trusted above all, Sophia. For nearly 30 years, Sophia had been the loyal housekeeper to the Harrisons. She'd quietly witnessed every twist and turn of their family's life, caring for Robert from his rebellious adolescence through the darkest days of his despair. Yet living all those years in this wealthy neighborhood had imbued Sophia with deep-seated prejudice against anyone different, especially poor people of color. Sophia had never liked Margaret or Jasmine, though she always wore a polite expression. Whenever Eleanor praised Margaret's devotion or marveled at Jasmine's purity, Sophia's face would contort ever so slightly and her eyes would flash a barely concealed contempt. In her mind, the Thompsons' presence was a stain on the Harrison legacy. It was Sophia who first approached Diana Harrison when she heard Diana was gathering dirt on Margaret. Loyal to the Harrisons and resentful at seeing outsiders occupy her old domain, Sophia went well beyond her role as housekeeper. She called Diana's lawyer and eagerly relayed half-truths and outright fabrications. Margaret rifled through Robert's study. She claimed Jasmine eavesdropped on family meetings. Margaret has been sneaking around the estate's financial documents. None of it had any proof, but it swelled Diana's lawsuit file and ignited a fresh wave of public outrage. One Monday morning, Margaret slipped into the storage room and heard Sophia's voice on the phone in the back garden. At first, she turned to leave, but then phrases like, "exploiting his kindness," "Harrison family assets," and "outsiders shouldn't stay long," stopped her in her tracks. She crept closer to the doorway and heard Sophia say, "I told you, Diana, Margaret isn't as innocent as she seems. First, she came begging for leftovers. And now she's clinging to Robert's wealth. I see it all. If you need more details, I'll keep feeding them to your lawyer." Margaret's hand clenched into a fist, tears burning her cheeks with anger and humiliation. She remembered every cold glance from Sophia, every sly insinuation, every polite but empty refusal behind Sophia's smile. Now it was clear the woman Robert trusted most was stabbing them in the back. That evening, Margaret stayed silent until Jasmine was sound asleep. Then she went into the kitchen where Sophia was wiping down counters and spoke with quiet resolve. "Sophia, what have you been telling Diana? Why invent lies about me and Jasmine? Do you think I wouldn't hear?" Sophia looked up without changing expression. "I'm only stating facts, Margaret. The Harrison family has been far too generous to you. No one wants this house turned into a mess by people unworthy of it. I'm preserving Robert's legacy, and you should know your place." Margaret's hands trembled with rage, but she forced herself to keep her voice steady. "You know, I have never touched anything that didn't belong to me. I only ever try to do my work honestly and protect my daughter from the very prejudices you're spreading. Do you even realize how much harm you've caused?" The confrontation grew more tense when Robert happened to walk by and caught the end of their exchange. He froze in the doorway, eyes wide, looking between the two women to whom he owed so much, each in a different way. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Margaret turned to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Sophia has been feeding Diana information to bolster her lawsuit, spreading lies about me and Jasmine. She's doing it not to protect you, but because she hates us for being black." Sophia didn't flinch. Her eyes blazed with stubborn anger. "I'm doing what's necessary to protect the family's inheritance. Robert, can't you see? She'll strip you of everything." Robert stood rooted to the spot. For decades, Sophia had been his closest confidant after his mother. She attended to his wounds, both physical and emotional, when the world abandoned him. But now he could not deny the truth. Margaret's words had peeled away all his lingering doubts that long-standing loyalty could be driven by fear of difference, by unconscious bigotry soaked into one's bones. The room fell into a heavy silence. Robert lowered his head, torn between past bonds and present reality, between a lifelong caretaker and the new family he had fought so hard to protect. Finally, he lifted his gaze and spoke to Sophia in the cool, firm tone of a true head of household. "Sophia, I thank you for all the years you've cared for this family, but I cannot tolerate any prejudice, any slander, or any betrayal within my home. If you cannot live in this family under these terms, I must let you go. This decision is not only for Margaret and Jasmine, it is for me. I choose to live by my conscience." Sophia was struck silent, her elderly eyes filling with tears. She knew in that moment that everything had changed forever. That night, for the first time in years, Robert sat long by the dark window, mourning the fragment of his past he had lost, yet feeling a strange peace in knowing he had finally chosen the side of justice and the truth of his own heart. After a night spent wrestling with the ghosts of his past, Robert woke to a heavy heart. The mansion felt strangely silent without Sophia's familiar footsteps. Only memories and faint echoes of laughter remained, reminders of all the trials they had faced together. He realized he hadn't just cut loose a piece of his childhood. He'd brought an end to an old era in which prejudice, even when wrapped in loyalty, served as an invisible jail for the human heart. That morning, he summoned Sophia to his sunlit study. Robert noted how much she'd aged since their first meeting. "Sophia," he said softly, "I know you believed you were protecting me and my family, but your fear and prejudice have hurt innocent people. No one in this house can be truly happy if we harbor hate. I'm grateful for your years of service, but as of today, I must say goodbye. You deserve to spend the rest of your life somewhere that brings you peace and honors your worth." Sophia said nothing, bowed her head, and slipped away in silence, tears glistening in her eyes, tears of someone caught between two worlds. Robert stood at the window long after she was gone, feeling both a pang of sorrow and a lightness of relief. He knew this was the right decision, not just to protect Margaret and Jasmine, but to free himself from the toxic cycles of his past. Yet beyond the mansion walls, the storm raged on. Diana's lawsuit had officially landed in court, transforming what was once a private family quarrel into a high-profile legal spectacle covered by the press. Editors and pundits competed to portray Robert, the paralyzed husband and alleged victim of a racial conspiracy, and Margaret, the mysterious woman painted as a heartless gold digger. Every act of kindness that Margaret and Jasmine had shown Robert was twisted into fodder for social media outrage, fanning the embers of racial animus. In the courtroom, Diana arrived in elegant defiance, flanked by a battalion of lawyers. She paraded Sophia's accusations of Margaret's shady dealings, produced financial records and doctored images to sully the mother and daughter's reputations, and declaimed at length about her duty to protect her ex-husband, the pain of someone who once shared Robert's life, and the dangers a vulnerable man faces when manipulated by outsiders. When Robert took the stand, he faced a barrage of nasty questions. Did you sign over property under Maggie's threat? Has little Jasmine accessed your personal files? Have you ever suspected emotional manipulation? Calmly, Robert replied, "I signed nothing without full awareness and unwavering trust. No one coerced or manipulated me. The only gift I received is life itself, a gift I thought lost to me for 20 years. Tension peaked when Diana's lawyer asked that 6-year-old Jasmine, her wide, innocent eyes, be called as a witness. The courtroom fell eerily silent. Margaret gripped her daughter's hand, fear etched on her face. But Jasmine surprised everyone, climbing onto the stand with quiet courage. She greeted the judge with a small smile and answered each question with surprising poise. "Jasmine?" the lawyer asked. "Do you know why you're here?" Jasmine glanced around, her eyes bright. "They said my mom and I did something bad to Mr. Robert, but I don't understand. He's my friend. I just help him be happy, and every day we try to help him remember how to walk." A hush fell over the room. The lawyer pressed on. "Have you ever taken anything from Mr. Robert? Has your mother taught you to sneak around?" Jasmine shook her head earnestly. "No, sir. Mama told me to always ask first. I only give Mr. Robert flowers. I think flowers make people happier than money." The judge softened. "Do you love Mr. Robert?" he asked. Jasmine nodded, eyes shining. "I love him so much. He used to be sad like my mom and me, but now he knows how to laugh. Everyone here calls us outsiders, but Mr. Robert calls my mom a friend, and he calls me his little miracle doctor." Quiet laughter and tears rippled through the gallery. Jasmine's simple words struck a chord, even among the reporters who had spread falsehoods. They began to see the story not through suspicion, but through the eyes of a child who only wanted to give and receive love. Finally, the judge ruled. There is no evidence that Margaret and Jasmine exploited or harmed Mr. Harrison. On the contrary, the court finds they have provided him significant emotional and physical benefit. Ms. Diana Harrison's case is dismissed. The Harrison family is free to continue their lives. Outside, the public buzzed over Jasmine's testimony. Headlines shifted from mockery to celebration of resilience, faith, and the small miracles born of human kindness. Letters of support, bouquets of flowers, and messages of apology poured into the mansion. Robert knew there were still challenges ahead. But trust, the invisible treasure he'd lost for 2 decades, had finally triumphed. Thanks to the love of a little black girl, and a woman who refused to surrender to prejudice. And in that moment, Robert understood that it was not legs nor money, but faith in decency that holds the true power to resurrect a soul. After Jasmine's moving testimony, the courtroom fell into an almost unbelievable hush. Those who had criticized and doubted her were now silent, listening, and a flicker of empathy appeared in their eyes. Margaret sat quietly in the gallery, tears welling, not from pain, but from pride and joy at seeing her little girl speak up for their entire family. And Robert felt something unlock in his chest, a part of his soul long imprisoned by fear, hurt, and shame. The lawsuit pressed on. Diana and her attorneys refused to relent, continually producing new documents and so-called evidence to paint Robert as the victim of an elaborate psychological scheme masterminded by Margaret and Jasmine. The media buzzed again, ready to pivot at a moment's notice for the next sensational headline. But this time, the tide was turning. That day, the courtroom was packed to capacity. The judge ordered a public medical demonstration with independent experts and reporters in attendance. Dr. Emily Richards, the neurologist who had followed Robert's case for nearly 20 years, was called to the stand. Emily, long skeptical of any Harrison miracle, had to revise her views after witnessing his undeniable progress and surprising medical indicators. Before the bench, she declared firmly, "Initially, I believed Mr. Harrison's improvements might stem from psychological effects or suggestion, but recent exams confirm real, medically remarkable recovery in his motor function and neural reflexes. There is no sign of medication tampering or fraudulent treatment. I can't explain how it happened, but it is fact." An independent neurologist echoed her findings, pointing to the MRI scans. "The patient's nervous system has reestablished its basic connections. In our field, this is a truly unique case," Diana's lawyer scoffed. "So, doctor, should we believe in miracles or in the fairy tale spun by a 6-year-old? Dr. Richards replied, visibly moved. "I present the scientific truth. Yet sometimes love, trust, and the will to live are forces science can't fully measure." A hush of astonishment fell over the room. Robert, who had remained quiet through every accusation, now faced the judge's request to stand. Margaret gripped Jasmine's hand. Eleanor covered her mouth, silently praying. Robert placed his hands on the chair arms and closed his eyes, gathering the strength of 2 decades of pain. A deep breath. Every gaze in the courtroom fixed on him, the man long deemed permanently disabled. He tensed, feeling a familiar numbness up his spine. But this time, there was no shame or fear. He opened his eyes and glimpsed Jasmine's encouraging nod. Robert smiled. Then, trembling but determined, He lifted himself up. Inch by inch, he rose, to the gasps of everyone present. The room seemed to choke on silence. Then he drew in a deep breath, took the assistant's hand, and took his first shaky step. Another step. A ripple of astonishment surged into spontaneous applause. Cameras flashed non-stop as reporters sprinted forward. It was real. Margaret sobbed with relief. Jasmine ran to hug his legs. Eleanor's tears flowed freely. The judge smiled and rapped his gavel. This is not only a legal victory, but a triumph of faith and human will. The judge dismissed Diana's case, preserving Robert's civil rights and property. No evidence of fraud or exploitation was found. Immediately, the media tone shifted from scorn to admiration, celebrating Robert's resilience, Margaret and Jasmine's courage, and the boundless love of this special family. Dressed in a simple white dress, Jasmine stood tall amid strangers, the living emblem of pure faith, a miracle that compelled society to reconsider itself. Schools and community groups launched campaigns for equality and anti-racism, adopting the Harrisons' story as their rallying cry. That evening in the familiar mansion, Robert, Margaret, Jasmine, and Eleanor sat together by candlelight. Robert whispered, "We've won more than a lawsuit. We've conquered the darkness of prejudice. This family was born from the miracle of faith." Margaret smiled and squeezed his hand. Jasmine, resting her head in Eleanor's lap, whispered, "Tomorrow, I'll teach Mr. Robert how to jump rope." They all laughed as a spring breeze drifted through the windows, carrying hope of a truly new beginning. Laughter and joy from that legal victory still echoed through the Harrison mansion on that first spring evening after the trial. Robert, Margaret, Jasmine, and Eleanor gathered together, unwilling to break the strange peace that had settled over them. The four of them, once strangers, once standing on opposite sides of society, had now become a unique family, bound by understanding, courage, and love that transcended every prejudice. The next morning, as the first sunlight turned the garden gold, Robert awoke earlier than usual. He practiced walking down the hallway, feeling each step, not alone anymore, and no longer weighted by despair. Margaret was watering the flower pots Jasmine had planted by hand, while the little girl chirped to Eleanor about her drawings of a happy family. After breakfast, Robert lingered at the kitchen doorway and watched Margaret intently. His eyes no longer held the darkness of a man burdened by shame and hurt, but instead the light of someone who had rediscovered faith, love, and purpose. "Margaret," Robert said softly, his voice full of emotion, "I've never had the courage to say this, but I love you. Not just because you saved my legs, but because you saved my soul. Because you believed in me when the world had turned away and taught me what a real family looks like." Margaret paused, tears quietly falling down her cheeks. She said nothing, only smiled, her heart brimming with happiness and emotion. Robert took her hand and knelt right there in the kitchen. For the first time in 20 years, he made the boldest move of his life. "Will you marry me, Margaret Thompson?" he whispered. A simple proposal that carried the weight of a lifetime of searching. Jasmine, accidentally witnessing the moment, squealed with delight. She ran forward to hug her mother and Robert while Eleanor hovered at the doorway, wiping away tears, partly regretful, partly proud that her son had finally found true happiness. That very day, Eleanor sought out Margaret and Jasmine as the two of them tended the garden. She hesitated, her gaze seeming to reflect on years of her own past. "Margaret, Jasmine, Eleanor began, in a voice softer and more genuine than ever before. I want to apologize to both of you. Perhaps I judged you too harshly, viewed you through the lens of my past and the unrecognized privilege I held. I let fear and pride cloud my judgment and treated people who only wanted love poorly. Margaret squeezed her daughter's shoulder, her eyes shining with emotion. Thank you for saying that, Eleanor. I understand. Everyone has their own fears. What matters is that you found the courage to see us differently and choose to stand with us. Eleanor bent down gently and embraced Jasmine, the little girl she had once doubted and alienated. From now on, I will protect both of you, just as I have always protected Robert, she whispered. Jasmine looked up and hugged Eleanor tightly, her smile reflecting rare happiness. Within days, news of Robert and Margaret's engagement had spread throughout the community. Surprisingly, instead of protest or backlash, most of Robert's old neighbors and friends began to change their tone. Many sent flowers, congratulatory cards, and heartfelt apologies after the trial. Some even publicly expressed support on social media, admitting they had been wrong to heed blind prejudice. The local nonprofit reached out to Margaret, inviting her to collaborate on projects supporting disadvantaged women and children. Schools asked Jasmine to share her story of the miracle of faith and courage, making the little black girl a new symbol of overcoming discrimination. As the wedding day approached, the Harrison mansion buzzed with laughter. Jasmine and Eleanor selected wedding blooms. Margaret tried on her dress with the help of new friends. Robert, no longer the lonely millionaire, busied himself with the guest list, insisting that everyone who had turned their back on the family be invited as a declaration. Everyone deserves the chance to change. On the night before the wedding, Margaret and Robert sat together in the garden, where the moonlight fell over the tiny flowers Jasmine had grown. Robert looked at his bride-to-be and whispered, "We've endured so many storms, so much pain, tears, and the hatred of people once called our friends. But perhaps because of all that, you and Jasmine became the true miracles of my life." Margaret rested her head on his shoulder and smiled. "And you taught us that sometimes a miracle isn't something grand, but simply the chance to live and be loved like ordinary people." The next morning, the entire community gathered before the Harrison mansion. No one dared make remarks about skin color, background, or status. Everyone rose to applaud as Robert took Margaret's hand and led her down the aisle. No wheelchair, no shame. Jasmine, radiant in her simple white dress, walked ahead as the flower girl. The Harrison story became a new emblem of faith and compassion. There was no more division, only laughter, joy, and the admiration of a once distant community. That day, as the church bells rang and white petals danced in the breeze, Margaret knew at last she had a family. Not just a shared roof, but a safe haven where love could take root and grow, undeterred by any barrier of skin color or past. The church bells rang out across a brilliant spring morning, heralding not only a moment the three residents of the Harrison mansion had dreamed of, but a wake-up call for the entire community. Today, Margaret, in her simple yet pure wedding gown, walked hand in hand with Robert, the man who had once despaired that he'd never stand again, as they took steady steps along the old tiled aisle of the grand church. Every gaze following them was no longer one of suspicion, but admiration, respect, and even remorse. Little Jasmine, proud in her white flower girl dress, gently scattered petals ahead of them, her radiant smile as bright as the morning sun embodied innocence, bravery, and unshakable faith. Behind her, Eleanor guided the older guests with a beaming, proud expression. They were a family now, not defined by blood alone, but forged by overcoming the deepest fractures of prejudice, fear, and mistrust. The ceremony itself was simple, yet overflowing with emotion. No one sat still as Robert, needing no wheelchair, stepped forward to escort Margaret down the aisle. A hushed reverence enveloped the room before bursting into applause and heartfelt sobs from those who had witnessed their journey. When it came time for his vows, Robert looked into Margaret's eyes that held the weight of past hurts, regret, gratitude, and above all, profound appreciation for the woman who had weathered every storm with him. His voice was slow, clear, and resonant, touching the hearts of everyone present. Today, before God and all of you, I declare this: love and trust are the true miracles of my life. Some say my ability to walk again is a marvel of medicine, but I know the greater miracle is learning to see beyond myself, rising above fear, breaking through invisible barriers our society has long imposed. I once let prejudice, shame, and loneliness paralyze my soul more completely than any physical injury ever could. Yet, through Margaret, through Jasmine, through Eleanor, and through everyone courageous enough to confront their own biases, I've learned that the greatest miracle is to be believed in, forgiven, and loved. He scanned the pews, finding faces that had once sneered or doubted now wearing tentative smiles of empathy. I hope that from this small story each of us will learn to open our hearts, to apologize, to make amends, and to give second chances to those we once excluded because of their background or skin color. Let us never allow fear or hatred to steal away the miracle that every human being deserves. Margaret squeezed Robert's hand, tears of pride glistening in her eyes. Jasmine stood below, clutching her tiny bouquet, her eyes shining with joy, fully aware that she had become both participant and witness to this extraordinary miracle of acceptance. When the service ended, the congregation streamed outside the church. For the first time, former critics, neighbors, old colleagues, even stern Mrs. Dolores stepped forward to shake hands and embrace Margaret and Robert, offering heartfelt apologies. They spoke of their earlier doubts and gossip and confessed that they had been moved by the Harrisons' unwavering faith and determination. Eleanor, unable to hold back her tears, declared to waiting reporters, "I once lived in pride and hidden fear cloaked in outdated prejudices. Now I pledge to be a protector of this new family and to work with all of you to build a community and a society that no longer tolerates bias." The story went national. Schools and non-profits adopted images of Jasmine and Margaret for equality campaigns. A photograph of Jasmine leading Robert down the floral aisle with Margaret beaming at their side went viral, shared millions of times with the message, "Miracles aren't found in the color of one's skin, but in the colors of our trust." Back at the Harrison mansion that evening, the atmosphere felt like a festival. New friends and neighbors who had changed their hearts gathered in the blooming garden. Jasmine darted among them, laughing, occasionally hushing at Eleanor's side to share new miracles she dreamed the world might know. As night fell, Robert held Margaret and Jasmine on the balcony, gazing at a star-lit sky. He knew that their joy belonged not just to their family, but glowed as hope for many others. That all wounds can heal if we dare to love, humble ourselves to change, and believe enough to forgive. Their story would stand as a lasting reminder to the community. Only trust and love can truly mend every fracture, even the most enduring barriers of racial prejudice. And only when we each dare to admit our mistakes and extend the miracle of kindness will society become truly fair and compassionate. In the gentle breeze rustling through the leaves, in Jasmine's joyful laughter echoing into the night, everyone knew the real miracle had arrived. Not in walking again, but in hearts learning to love and forgive. And so a new chapter began, summed up in two simple words: family.